just being really confident in yourself and your abilities, because all we're doing is imparting knowledge and then having those discussions. So I feel that teachers need to put themselves back into the learner seat. We don't know it all. Sometimes young people ask me questions. I'll say, I don't know. Let's look it up together and we'll find out.
Welcome to In This Together. Brilliant day today. Really excited about our guest. We have Nicole Campbell. She is a Senior PSHE Subject Lead and Champion of Wellbeing and Education, and soon to be author. Hopefully we'll hear about that today as well. Nicole, so lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Becky.
So let's get right into it. We've had some kind of legislation and guidance from the government recently, and I wanted to start with thinking about what do you think there should be age restrictions on teaching certain topics in RSE and PSHE?
Personally, I think it's really about working with the parents where these things are concerned. I feel that parents should have dual responsibility and a say in what their children are learning. And I think it's really important that they are listened to. And I think it's also important that we come with the research to explain why we're teaching these topics at these ages. Because I think that what's going on at the moment with young people and children, some parents aren't even aware of things like online dangers, the information that the children are getting at a younger age from other children. It's important that we offset some of that misinformation with the teaching of it in schools. So I do think some of it is age appropriate. However, topics like female genital mutilation, for example, I've taught those topics at the age appropriate level that the PSHE Association or the government say it should be taught at. And as you're teaching, you can feel that the young people are uncomfortable with it, or they say things like that traumatized me. And then you end the lesson thinking, is that really pitched at the right age? So there are some things I teach where I think this doesn't seem that appropriate. But then there'll be other things where, for instance, like pornography. Children in primary school, when I was working there, they were watching pornography. There's no way to butter it up, really. If children in year 4 have access to those types of things and no one's speaking to them about it, it can just be so isolating for them or alienating. So I do think it's about us understanding where young people are at, and maybe speaking with them before we teach certain things, getting that feedback before we go in. And in that way, we kind of gauge how they feel about learning about those things. Because sometimes I don't think we have that space to use them as consultants to say, what do you want to learn? Why do you want to learn it? So I think it's about making them have more agency over what they're learning.
And in other subjects, we are kind of taught in our teacher training that we have to understand what's the foundation of knowledge of the students that we've got in front of us. What do they already know before we start to teach them new things? But we don't seem to do, well, we don't have the time to do that in PSHE and RSE often, do we? Because we're going to talk about how you deliver PSHE RSE, but for most schools, it is non-specialist teachers teaching maybe 1 hour a week, sometimes like 20 minutes a week. Don't have the time to cover the curriculum, let alone that opportunity to talk to young people. But you're absolutely right. Having that sense from them, you use FGM as an example. If young people don't know anything about that at all, that could be really traumatizing to kind of be thrown into that subject from the outset. And as you say, parents aren't, and carers and teachers aren't necessarily aware of what children and young people are aware of. We might have a rose-tinted view of what they know, or we might assume that because we don't talk about that at home, our children won't know about it. It's a really difficult balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, definitely.
I think some interesting things have been said, and one of the things that really strikes to me is when we're thinking about age-appropriate topics, what I'm thinking is I was taught things that I think I should have been taught earlier, but then there's also things that I was taught late, but then there's also things that were taught to me in a very trauma-informed way. So I'm wondering, what is the biggest challenges you face when you're delivering PSHE? Do you think that delivering it in a trauma-informed way matters? Because for someone like me, I felt like when I was taught things like consent very later on down the line, I was absolutely traumatized. I did not like the way it was delivered to me and stuff. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think things like consent should be taught like from nursery age. So at earlier stage, I feel that we can start to use the language, smaller children understand what it means to allow someone to do something or not, or ask for permission first and those types of things. So consent, definitely, if it's taught too late, I don't think it's a great thing. Teaching in a trauma-informed way, I think for me, the lesson that I was delivering was on behalf of a university. So I was presenting it. It didn't feel like it was mine. So I think that's the difficulties as well. As a teacher, if you're not presenting your own work, which is what I do now, but back then I was working with other people, I might have used other people's slides if I wasn't that knowledgeable about the topic, for instance, then you're just going to teach it. You're not thinking about how's this going to come across. So now I'm much more aware of it's got to be for me. I've got to feel comfortable teaching it. And I put myself in the learner's seat and think, well, how are they going to react to it as well? So I do think it's about us putting a bit more effort into what we're teaching and how we're teaching it, as opposed to just taking someone else's work and presenting it. Because I think for most teachers that are not specialists like me, they might not have the time to make their own resources. So they're just grabbing PowerPoints off TES at the last minute, teaching it. Some of them might not even watch videos before they show them, things like that. So I think little things can help preempt, how a student reacts to it. But I think it's also about staying on top of the recent developments, things like sextortion, extorting young people for money online. If we know there's research saying, 14 and 15-year-olds or males are especially affected by that, then really we should be going in like 11, 12. We need to be saying, okay, that's the danger age. Let's teach that before, because we know those are the ages it happens at mostly. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. We can't leave certain things too late. We've got to use the knowledge that we have and use it in a logical way.
I'm interested to hear, do you think there is more harm in teaching things later than there is teaching it earlier on? So do you think that there's more harm done when we leave things taught? For example, sextortion, do you think there's more harm done if we teach them at sixth form level rather than teaching them earlier on? Because I've heard this a lot. I've heard parents say, well, they're too young to be learning about that. But I've always said, like, there's more harm not teaching them and leaving it too late than teaching them too early. Because I don't think there's such thing as teaching young people something too early. The media is going to teach them anyway, so it might as well come from trained professionals.
Definitely, I agree. So for me personally, sometimes I'm a parent first, I always say, and a teacher second. So in my mind, parents were not perfect. We love our children, want to protect them. But in this day of age, children have got these iPads or similar devices and they'll be on Roblox, for example. And I don't think that parents actually do know the true natures behind those, what they think are innocent games. So sometimes when they're saying these things, they don't totally understand what young people are going through. So I feel like it's more about parent consultations, letting them know the dangers that are out there. We have to reinforce that children are not as innocent as they used to be, that these are the facts. And I wish they were. We can't take it back. Technology has changed things totally. And we need to put ourselves in the seat of a young person. I'm 42 years old. I didn't grow up with all this technology. I would not know what it's like to grow up in this age. I knew what life was like before. Young people don't have that. So I always have to have the empathy to think, do you know what? This is what's going on. This is what's happening at ground level. This is what they need to know. So I think you're right. Protection or prevention is better than cure. It really is. But saying that, if we are teaching a topic that seems to be inappropriate at that age, we can adapt it. So I know there's some topics we teach, like year 5 and 6, the way we'll teach it to them, like sex, for example. Young people, they learn about their body parts. We're teaching it to them in a really scientific way. And then as you get older, we're teaching it to you more in an emotional way, where we might try consent in more because it makes sense as you're getting older. But at the same time, children that are younger, they do have that knowledge already. So to pretend they don't is being a bit ignorant to what's actually going on out there, if I'm honest.
So I know lots of schools and at Twinkle, our resources are in a spiral curriculum, aren't they? So you kind of come back round to the same topic again over different year groups, but just you approach it in a different way. Are there any other challenges you see when around delivering PSHE?
I've had to adapt my curriculum to suit my school demographic, to suit the environment that the children are living in. Sometimes when I'm teaching the curriculum as a whole, like for the UK-wide curriculum, I think to myself, this in particular isn't relevant to my students, or I'm teaching it, they're yawning, they're saying this isn't relevant. So, for example, teaching year 10s about gambling, the dangers of gambling, how to avoid it. And they'll be like, Miss, we haven't got any money to gamble. And I'll be like, oh, yeah. So, yeah, poverty is a real big thing in certain demographical areas. But then I think about when they're older, they might be working and they might be tempted by gambling. It then becomes a thing where you're teaching them something not for now. It's a life lesson. So it's something you're going to learn now, but you're going to take with you. So sometimes explaining that to them is quite difficult because they're wondering, what's the relevance now? I'm not interested in this. It doesn't. It's not for me. So yeah, that can be challenging. That's just an example.
Yeah, that's a really good example because obviously, you know, when we're in adolescence, we're very much in our moment, aren't we? And what's important to us and what we're focusing on in it. And we aren't necessarily adept at looking to the future, to the potential. You know, we can but hope that in 5 years' time, if they're facing a challenge, they think back to Mrs. Campbell's lesson and go, oh, yes, I remember what she said about the dangers of gambling. I'll steer clear. But it doesn't always, I mean, you find that in all subjects, don't you? Like, why am I going to use this in the rest of my life? And I guess PSHE and RSE would absolutely be the same. So it would be brilliant if you could tell us about your role, because the people listening who are working in schools will have an expectation around PSHE and RSE. If they've had an experience like me, it would have been that I was a head of year and I was in charge of PSHE for a long time, and that involved me pulling together all the resources and then trying to share it across 20 different members of staff who then had to deliver that to students over a period of time, many of whom, you know, didn't feel particularly confident, and we'll talk a little bit later on about that. But and often it was early in my career, they weren't the best resources because I didn't have a huge amount of time to do that. What's the importance, do you think, of having specialist teachers in RSE and PSHE? Because I think we're both on the same page here that we think that could be a real game changer in this area. How might it improve outcomes?
I think it's absolutely necessary. So the manuscript I've just finished was called Harmful Substances. So I wrote a book for teachers talking about the pedagogy behind the topic, giving them lesson plans and resources, showing them how to teach it. Because if you're a new teacher or you're a non-specialist PSHE teacher, you might not have the passion behind it. You might also lack the knowledge. You feel way out of your depth. I'll give an example. I prepare form time activities for teachers that are PSHE styled. And I think to myself, oh, yeah, these are great. But other people look at it and think, oh, no, I don't want to show that. They might feel apprehensive about it. So I think every school should have a dedicated slot on the timetable for this subject. I don't think it should be negotiable. And if they can't fit that into the timetable, I've done a lot of research with the University of Sheffield that says that we could teach it in an interdisciplinary way. So if we all were a bit more organised, at the end of the last term or summer, the end of the summer, we say, okay, how does PSHE fit in across the curriculums?
Yeah.
And we look at how we don't just teach it discreetly, how can we embed it throughout our school and in our curriculums so that we're not isolating it as a subject? It's just another thing to do, or a headache for a person that really doesn't have the time or has a lot going on already. I think we can do that. And I've found ways to merge my subject into other subjects. And I think that's because I've been a primary school teacher. I'm used to teaching lots of different subjects. So coming to secondary school was a shock. It was like all these separate subjects going on. When I'm quite used to teaching it in a diverse way, if I'm honest. I can be really creative with it. So I think that's what it needs. It needs a bit of creativity. It needs a bit of love. And I don't think it needs to be separated. Everything in PSHE goes to all these different subjects. I just think it's about managing the load of it so that it doesn't lay on just these people to do it, but everyone's got a responsibility to teach it. It needs to have a whole school approach, you know, it needs to be prioritised. But I think that about wellbeing as well. That can be quite tokenistic in school. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
And it always amazes me that actually these are some of the most important things that we can be teaching our children, young people, you know. I've been an English teacher and know that's hugely important. So is maths. All of those subjects are really crucial for our children's development. But, you know, when we're talking about their safety, and I know lots of parents would argue, and parents' carers might argue that it's my job to teach my child those things. And absolutely, as a parent as well, I see that as my responsibility. But not all parents' carers do see that as their responsibility. Not all parents' carers have the capacity to teach those things. So we are filling a really important gap, aren't we?
Definitely. I think that part of the problem is parents are not really aware of what it entails. Again, I feel that the parent-school communication needs to be really strong, and we need to listen to the parents. So I feel like these consultations, they need to happen. For instance, if a child's starting year 7, then parents need to know, what is my child going to be learning in that respects? Then they can feed back to me, what is your child learning at home? What kind of things you talk about? I share a newsletter. I tell them at the beginning of every term, this is what we're learning. If you've got any problems with it, email me. If you've got any questions, email me. And then I give them like sample questions that they can ask their children when they come home. And I think in that way, we're that team teaching, aren't we? I'm teaching it at school, you're discussing it with them at home. So then it becomes to the child as if, actually, I'm learning this at home and at school. So for the children that are not doing that at home, at least they're getting it at school. And the children that are getting it at home are getting it at school as well. So it can only benefit them. It wouldn't be a disadvantage.
I love that idea that you're giving questions to carry on those conversations at home, because I think sometimes probably the children are educating the parents as well, aren't they, in that process on areas that they might not be as aware of. And you know, the government guidance that came out in July of 25, depending on when this podcast goes out, you know, really put a heavy emphasis on the fact that we need to be communicating what we're teaching children and young people around PSHE and RSE. Parents and carers need to know. They need to be aware. As Laiba said, for some young people, they might experience something really traumatic in a classroom and they're going to go home. They need to be able to have those conversations where possible with that adult, don't they?
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, right? You had quite a journey. Like, you started off as a primary school teacher, and then you started teaching PSHE. What made you stay? What made you stay doing this job? What do you love? Why do you love working with young people and teaching PSHE?
I think it's to do with my childhood and my experiences as a teenager. I could have really benefited from having a teacher like myself. So when I'm teaching, I always see it as, what was I lacking when I was that age? What do young people need? And like Becky said, some topics we're teaching, like trigonometry and maths, for example. If I'm not going to be a pilot or an astronaut, or I need to work out the trajectory to the moon, when am I ever going to use those skills? So going back to your question, I feel that education should be tailor-made. I feel that subjects like trigonometry could well wait till we decide, you know, what are young people's career path choices or their interests, and then maybe they learn those topics. Is it vital they learn trigonometry, or could we change that to them learn about saving and spending and budgeting and investing and all these things? Because we really need to start prioritising, what are we teaching, why are we teaching it, and is this relevant? Because otherwise, we're just teaching. Children are learning for tests. I learned cos, sin, and tan. I don't know what that means. And I passed my exams. My brain got rid of that information as soon as it was over. So it shows that our working memories decide what we hold on to and what we don't. We learn for tests, sure, we get a result, but how does that feed into our life and our wider world? Because for me, otherwise, it's just quite shallow, isn't it? It's like, you've got to learn this. Why do I have to learn it? So I think young people themselves need to start asking these questions. I always say, make good trouble, you know. Who needs to be in charge of your curriculum? This is my education, and I want it to benefit my life. So I think if young people had more agency in that, then I think things would improve, outcomes would improve. Young people won't be sitting there thinking, how's this relevant to my life? I've heard that so many times. So I think we just need to be a bit more, we need to make it more pupil-led, is what I mean. And I'm not saying trigonometry is bad. I don't want that message
Checking
to
it all
go
the
out.
maths teachers.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. There's other things as well, like Pythagorean theory, if you call it that. I don't remember it. But I'm hoping the things that I teach stick with young people. And I'm always honest with them in a safeguarding way. I'll share a few of my experiences that I'm comfortable sharing, but I always say to them, you know, I know being that age is not easy. So what keeps me in the job is knowing that young people really need it. And as I've done it I'm in my 4th year now, I definitely want to expand my reach. I don't want to just stay in one school. For me, that would be an atrocity, because I know there's so many young people to help out there. So just restricting myself to one corner of the earth isn't really going to fulfill me for that much longer. So in
You
answer to
know,
your question, I'm enjoying it right now, but I'm expanding as well.
you know what I find really interesting, because I was in school not long ago. I'm in university now. I actually agree with the fact that with maths and English, you're compulsory legally you're supposed to pass it till you're 18. But with PSHE, you don't learn about it outside of school. As much as we think that we pick it up from our parents, like coming from a South Asian background, my parents would never talk about relationships with me, talk about budgeting, saving, and stuff. And even to an extent, I don't think I was taught PSHE the way you're describing it now. When you're speaking about, I was like, hang on a second. I did not know what a credit card was. I went into uni not knowing what an arranged overdraft was and all that stuff. I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like and stuff. So PSHE, I think, is one of those things that stick with you throughout your life. It's one of those, I think, essential stuff. It should be on the same level as maths and English, because the government makes us do that till we're 18. But why don't we expand PSHE from a younger age reach and do it all the way till the end and stuff? It should be on our timetabled curriculum like PE and stuff. I'm sure students would agree with me. We don't want to do PE every week. We want to learn about stuff that we're gonna learn, like stuff that we're gonna need in the future, because in some cultures, talking about the things you learn in PSHE is definitely not spoken about. So
Mm,
from a student's perspective, I actually agree.
well
I
said.
do just want to reassure all the PE teachers and maths teachers listening that we do value your
Me
subjects and we
too.
do understand that they are important. But I absolutely agree. I think the problem is, if you look at how PSHE is often run in schools, I've kind of alluded to it already. It's an afterthought. It's a last minute kind of throw out a PowerPoint, poor teachers, who've never seen this thing before. They've got to stand up in front of young people or children and talk through these topics. I think even more so in secondary than in primary. At least in primary, you've got, a class that you get to know and you build that relationship with. I think it becomes
Exactly.
much easier to embed it and talk about it, read a story about it, embed it in some of your English work. Whereas,
Mm,
it's so much more kind of fragmented at secondary school, and it is often just the form tutor delivering something that they might find triggering, that they might not be comfortable and confident delivering. You obviously love working with young people. You create space. I know I've seen lots of on LinkedIn, you talk about the conversations you have with young people in the classroom, and you create that open space and allow them to have those conversations, which I'm sensing that, perhaps Laiba didn't have that experience, and I know lots of other people that haven't. But the reality is, as much as we would love it to be the case, we're probably not going to get full-time PSHE and RSE teachers across the board anytime soon, because budgets just don't allow for it. We'd have to have a whole overhaul of initial teacher training, etc., in terms of having that subject.
mm.
So what advice would you give any of those people out there who are listening, thinking they dread that email that pops through or the thing in their tray that says you're going to deliver this content next week, and it's something that they're not confident about, or something that they're worried about teaching, or they just feel like PSHE is an add-on that they don't really have time to prepare for? What advice would you give them?
I would say to communicate it, because if you don't and you force yourself to do it, it's going to affect the students negatively, because students can tell whether you're comfortable or not. There was a time when I used to dread certain topics, especially coming to secondary school. I feel like, how am I going to teach FGM, female genital mutilation, or how am I going to teach pornography? And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, these are children and it's my responsibility to teach them. And the best way I can describe it is to just go for it, like jumping in at the deep end a bit, just being really confident in yourself and your abilities, because all we're doing is imparting knowledge and then having those discussions. So I feel that teachers need to put themselves back into the learner seat. We don't know it all. Sometimes young people ask me questions. I'll say, I don't know. Let's look it up together and we'll find out. This week we were talking about misandrist. Do any of you know what that is?
I've
Yeah?
heard it, but you can explain it probably
Yeah.
better than I can.
So misogynist is what you call a male who hates women, whereas a misandrist is a female that hates men. And we had a really good topic discussion with young people last week. I did some work with Apple doing a podcast workshop, and with young people learning how to podcast. We were talking about misandries. They were like, what is that? And I was just thinking, wow, we come out of these terms, we're teaching young people, and as teachers, we think, oh, I don't want to teach about that. But we have to think, you know, I didn't know much about misandries. I hadn't heard the term. It was like something new I'd learned. So I'd always share it with young people, you know, I don't know this, but let's learn it together. If you're uncomfortable teaching it, it's about communicating that to the person telling you to teach it. If you have no choice, then be honest with the student. Just say, look, I don't know that much about this. So this is going to be very much us learning together. And I think that they would respect that more than you going in and maybe nervously fidgeting with the slides and looking really uncomfortable. Because young people just value honesty, I think, and genuinity.
Yeah, I think, and that creating that space where actually questions are fine and we don't all have to know the answers. And I don't think there's any topic in PSHE or RSE where everyone will know all of the answers, because it's so dependent, it's so subjective, isn't it? Dependent on different people's experiences. I think that's brilliant advice to, number one, communicate when you feel uncomfortable. I think staff will feel a lot of pressure that they have to do this. And yes, there might be an ultimate point at which they are the only person that can stand in the room and do that. But that's not to say they can't ask for support. They can't ask to, sometimes these things are done on a kind of a staggered approach. So you might be able to go and watch someone else teaching it first, or you might be able to have someone else in the room to support those conversations. So there might be other things that can happen to support you. And I think it is really important to be clear that you feel uncomfortable in delivering whatever topic that is. But then, as you say, if you do find yourself in that situation, I think these, we find it very difficult, I think, as teachers often to let go of control, or the idea that we are the most knowledgeable person in the room. And I think that tends to lead us into situations where young people will find us out very quickly, because they will work it out. Like you say, they'll see the signs, they'll notice you're a bit nervous. So actually going in and going, this is the topic, I don't know a huge amount about it, let's learn it together, can be a really powerful approach, can't it?
Yeah, I teach PSHE every fortnight to every person in the school. So over the span of a year, I'm only seeing them 19 times,
Right.
19 hours on the average. We have drop-down days, about 3 a year, so they're good as well. But when you compare that to primary school teaching, where you're with them 6 hours a day, that's 30 hours a week. So in 1 week, I could be with my primary school students more than I am with the secondary students all year. So I often question my impacts. I look at my impacts as a primary school teacher. I can look at it from the beginning of the year to the end and say, I really helped those children, and being with me was quite nurturing, actually, because I had that time to develop, get to know them. Whereas I find in secondary school, which is they're in, they're out, like popping into the sweetie shop or something.
Yeah.
I try my best, but I do know that it's not enough time. I can feel that.
Which is why, like you said earlier, there needs to be a whole school approach to this, doesn't there? It needs to not, it needs to be those PSHE lessons, yes, but what are we talking about in assemblies? What are we doing in, I was a drama teacher, and quite often we would cover some of the topics for PSHE in drama lessons, because they were a perfect opportunity to explore particular topics, and I loved it anyway. So that we could embed some of those things, healthy relationships and things like that in the drama curriculum as well, and meet both of those needs. But it takes someone to take the time to build that, doesn't it? That's not an easy job to do. And I think, so as well as those teachers feeling the pressure, really we should have a whole school approach that takes some of that pressure off, to know actually it's not all on you as well. So when you're teaching consent, you aren't the only person that's going to talk about this. This isn't the only time they're going to be covering this topic. You aren't responsible for all 30 of these young people understanding consent, because as we know with any learning, once you go through it once, that doesn't mean you've learnt it. You have to come back to it and revisit those things. And it can be really, really challenging. Well, that's brilliant. Nicole, thank you so much for your input today. That has been really, really insightful, and I think certainly opened Laiba's eyes to how PSHE and RSE could be run. And I would love it if more schools heard this and took this approach on. I think I know one other school that I've spoken to that have full-time PSHE RSE teachers, which is, incredible. I think we should absolutely have more of it. We always end our podcast with the sharing is caring section. And what we do is ask our guests if you could recommend anything And obviously you've got a book coming out, so I recommend your book. But is there anything else you would recommend for people listening that they can go off and learn more about this topic?
Yeah, I feel what I've started doing is I've started doing social media campaigns. So it's very much child-led. I'll take the topic and I'll give them a project to do where they're working collaboratively in groups. What this can do for the teachers is it takes a lot of the pressure of teaching from the front, and you give them what you want them to do, because young people are very technical, and if you put them, obviously want to reduce the screen time, but the truth is if we give them a project to do, they will run with it. So oftentimes I've let them do like a social media campaign, for instance, using consent. Let's create a consent campaign and just spread awareness about this topic. And the things that they come out with are just amazing. So we underestimate young people sometimes. But I think as teachers, sometimes we talk too much, and it's all about giving them the agency now, giving them the voice, the advocacy, and that is the way forward, especially for teachers that might feel uncomfortable teaching from the front. So yeah, I'm excited
I
about
love
sharing
that.
some of that on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And also, we're talking social media, so that's a language that they think of. But because social media is such short form communication, they have to understand the topic in order to be able to communicate it effectively in that short form. So they've got to go through that process of understanding what consent is before they can put it into their, I was going to say Facebook post, but no young person is making Facebook posts. Let's admit it. That's just me showing my age now. Their Snapchat, whatever it is they're creating, they've got to understand it in order to be able to communicate it in that form. I think that's a really, really brilliant, helpful topic. I think, Laiba, you'd have liked to have done that at school, would you?
100%, 150%. It would have made me in control of my own, like, learning, and I'm quite opinionated, I think. Beck would agree, probably.
Yes, you
So
are.
yeah, it allows me to like express my opinion and stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, that group work as well, people being, young people being, I think that you hit the nail on the head there, Nicole. Sometimes when we're teaching subjects we don't feel comfortable with, we try and control everything, don't we? And then that means we talk too much from the front and we don't give them much free time to do their own thing because we feel like we need to be in control. But actually, sometimes we need to relinquish that in order to get the best out of them. Love that. What a
Yeah.
brilliant tip to end on. Thank you so much. So thank you, Nicole, for your time. We really appreciate talking to you, and hopefully we've inspired and helped some people listening that might be going to teach PSHE or RSE in the next few days or weeks. We would love to have you follow us on your podcast platform, and if you feel able to give us a rating and review, that would be wonderful. It means more people will find out about the podcast, and we think these are conversations educators need to hear.
Brilliant.
Don't forget to drop us an email if you have any
Laiba, you
thoughts,
can do your
comments,
last bit.
questions, or want to share some. Don't forget to drop us an email if you have thoughts, comments, or questions, or want to share some brilliant work that you are doing for wellbeing in your setting. Team wellbeing at twinkle.co.uk.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.